What does trust look like? Leave your answer down in the comments below. I'd like to hear from you. Welcome to The Whole Truth, where I'm taking you through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation without skipping anything, because God's Word in its entirety has the answers for our lives. We just have to actually study it. So every day we're going a little further into God's Word. We have made it to Exodus chapter 14. So you want to grab a Bible or open it up on your tablet or your phone or whatever device you're on and look at Exodus chapter 14. And here's what we read in Exodus chapter 14. God says, now the Lord said to Moses, speak to the children of Israel that they turn and camp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, opposite of Baal-zephon. You shall camp before it by the sea, for Pharaoh will say to the children of Israel, they are bewildered by the land. The wilderness has closed them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will pursue them, and I will gain honor over Pharaoh and all of his army, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. My goodness. So after everything that's happened, 10 plagues that have happened, finally Israel has been let go. The nation of Israel, the people of Israel, the Hebrew people, the Jewish people, those are all the same group, whatever word you want to put there, whatever title you want to give them, they have been released. They've been freed from slavery, 400 years of slavery. Pharaoh finally said, remember after the 10th plague, when the children died or when the firstborn died, that Pharaoh called in for Moses in the middle of the night and said, get out, tell them all to get out. And the people, the Israelite people, actually plundered the Egyptians because the Egyptians were so ready to get rid of them that the Egyptians said, here, take gold, take silver, take treasures, and they sent them on their way. So Egypt has let them go, and Israel has left. They have fled in the middle of the night. Now, they were fleeing from Egypt. Over 1 million people probably fleeing from Egypt. This mass exodus, that's where we get the name, by the way. This mass exodus from Egypt. And now God says, stop and camp by the sea. Can you imagine? I mean, we're talking 1 million people on the move here. And instead of continuing to press on and running for days to get as far away as possible, God says, stop. I want you to stop right here by the sea. The other day, it was my birthday this past weekend, and my kids and wife, they got me, you ever see a Facebook ad and then you buy something? It was one of those. But I wanted it, and I actually needed it. It worked really well. It's a chainsaw, but it's a manual chainsaw. It's just a chain with a strap on either side, and you pull it, and then you can attach a rope to it and throw it on a higher branch, and then you can, pull the chain from either side, and you can, saw through the branch. Well, we threw the chain around one of the branches. We have in the backyard, we have a kickball field. We go back there and play kickball, and there's this one branch that has been in the way. We use a tree for home base, and there's been this branch in the way, and I wanted to cut it down, but I couldn't reach it with the pole saw. So I took the new rope saw, manual chainsaw out, and I threw it over the branch. This was just this past weekend, and we're trying to saw through the branch, and the chain got stuck. And so we needed to grab the branch and to pull the branch to give a little space so that we could get the saw released and we could saw further. Well, I grabbed my oldest son, and I grabbed him, went up under his thighs, and I grabbed him and tried to lift him up, and he panicked and started squirming and kicking. He goes, no, don't do that, just stop. And I put him down. I said, I'm not going to drop you. And my youngest daughter ran over, and she goes, pick me up, I trust you. The truth is this. Now, I'm not saying anything wrong about what my son did. He didn't want me to pick him up. I'm just using that as an example to say he didn't trust that I was going to be able to hold him. He thought I was going to drop him. And yet my youngest daughter, she had no fear whatsoever that I was going to drop her. She wanted to be picked up. And she even said, I trust you, pick me up, I want to go. And so I picked her up high, and she grabbed the branch, and we sawed through, whatever. But the idea is simply this, that we all know that we should trust God. But sometimes we end up in these situations when God asks us to do something, and that trust becomes difficult, doesn't it? Look at what happens next. Look, this is now verse 5. So we're Exodus chapter 14, verse 5. Now it was told the king of Egypt that the people had fled, And the heart of the Pharaoh and his servants was turned against the people. And they said, why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And so he made ready his chariot and took his people with him. Also, he took 600 choice chariots and all the chariots of Egypt with captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with boldness. And so the Egyptians pursued them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, his army, and overtook them camping by the sea of Pi-hahiroth before Baal-zephon. And then even in verse 10, and when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So we're talking same day. Pharaoh just let the people go, but by the end of the day, by the however long they've been traveling before they get to the sea, Pharaoh says, why did we do this? Why did we let these people go? And if you notice, it's not just the Pharaoh, the captains, the people, everybody started looking around, and they started looking at their chores and the things they needed around their house. Remember, 400 years they've had slaves, and now those slaves, they've just let them go. And Pharaoh says, why have we done this? And he takes his people. It says he takes his captains, he takes chariots, 600 choice chariots, he takes all the people with him, and he goes out after the Israelite people. He is going to get them, and he is going to take them captive and bring them back home, or at least what he would consider as their home, the Egyptians' home. He's going to bring them back with him. And the people are in agreement. How quickly we forget what God has done. Remember, just in the middle of the night, that same day, that the angel of the Lord had went through and taken the firstborn, and there was weeping in all of Egypt. And now they're so concerned with the slaves that they freed that they're going to go pursue them. They're going to go get them and bring them back. And don't you know, in their minds, when they get them and bring them back, they're going to treat them even harsher than they did before. 10 plagues. Egypt is ravaged. The people have been crying and saying, if we don't let them go, there'll be nothing left. Remember when they sent them out, they said, go before we all die, so that we all don't die. Get out of here. But now in the same day, they're closing in on the Israelite people, and they're pursuing after them. Now you need to know that the reason God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and the reason God had it happen this way, had the people stop and camp. Them stopping and camping, notice that God told them to stop and camp, and then there in verse 13 or so, 12 or 13, we read that the people left with boldness. They weren't hiding. They weren't sneaking out one at a time. No, they went out with boldness. Everybody went, and even more bold. They stopped and they camped. And now Egypt thinks they could go overtake them and bring them back home and return them. Now, I don't know what they're thinking in their minds. I mean, what plague do you think is going to come next? How much can you handle? How many famines and pestilence and lice and locust and water turning into blood and frogs and all the things that have happened in Egypt? The land is completely ravaged. But I want you to understand this last thing. There was one more person that God was proving that he was over top of. He proved he was over top of every one of their gods. Their sun god, their water god, their fertility god. Every god that Egypt worshipped, God proved that they were no actual God, that he is the Lord. But now he needed to deal with one more. Pharaoh himself. Pharaoh now pursues, he convinces all the people in Egypt to go chasing after the Israelite people. And their end is not going to be pretty here. And what God is doing is proving to Egypt and to Pharaoh that God, Yahweh, Jehovah, he is God and no one else. Not even Pharaoh. Nobody is God except our Father in heaven. And he wanted them to see that. He wanted everyone to see that. He even wanted Egypt to see that. And so Pharaoh pursues after them, and the people looked up and the Israelite people looked up from beside the sea, and what did they see was Pharaoh chasing after them. And so I'm picking up in verse 10, and we'll just read a few more verses. Stick with me. We're almost done for today. And Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. And read this. So they were very afraid. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. And then they said to Moses, because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt so with us to bring us up out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we die in the wilderness. And in verse 13, Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. The Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. The Israelite people look up. Egypt is coming against them, is marching after them. I'm sure that's a scary feeling. And they were fearful. They immediately started crying, saying, why have you done this? Why have you brought us out here? Why have you done this to us? Notice too, God didn't harden Israel's hearts, and yet they too quickly forgot what God had already done in Egypt over the past year, probably. That's about how long the 10 plagues took, was probably about a year. After about a year of those plagues happening in Egypt for God to free them, and they already forgot what God had done. But notice what Moses said. He said, be still, hold your peace, watch what the Lord is going to do. You know, when I picked my daughter up to have her grab that branch, I had her. I'm a 200-pound man holding a 60-pound girl on my shoulders. I had her. I wasn't going to drop her. Even if she couldn't hold herself and she fell, I was going to hold her. She wasn't going anywhere, not based on her own strength or her own balance, but based upon my strength. I was going to hold her. And that's what God will do with us. He will hold us. He does hold us. He keeps us. Thankfully, I am so thankful when I read this that God didn't change his mind right then and there and go, well, they don't trust me, so I guess why should I help them? They're already crying out against me, and I know they're going to do this for the next couple of 100 years, and so why should I even mess with them? They're just going to turn their backs on me. They're just going to be a stiff-necked people, and they're not going to believe me, and they're not going to trust me. I guess I'll just let them die here. I guess I'm going to let Egypt come and take over and slaughter them and only keep the women and the children and bring them back. Thankfully, God didn't base his salvation on their level of trust. And you know what? Thankfully, God doesn't do that to us. Because many times I think when we get to the point that God says, be still for a minute, I don't want you to do anything. I think that's when we have the hardest time trusting. We want to do something. We want to fix it. We want to make it better. We want to go further. We want to go after something or go after someone or go do something. We want to have a physical action and we want to do it. And yet, God doesn't want you to base it on your own strength. If it was based on their own strength, they'd still be in slavery. And by the way, if your salvation was based on your own strength, you'd still be in slavery to sin. But God, by his strength, has saved us. By his might, by his power. And so we can find rest in him. And so when he says, be still, we can trust and be still. Maybe God's telling you today to be still and just trust him for who he is. All right, everybody, I hope that you enjoyed today's video, and I will see you tomorrow with more of Exodus chapter 14 as we see Israel actually get to cross the Red Sea, but on dry ground. I'll see you then.